Welcome back to part 2 of Eden, God's magnificent automatic healthcare system. Part 2 is acclimating to outdoor healing. All right, we'll start with prayer. Lord God, we know we're not worthy of the least of your mercies, yet you have surrounded us with mercies. Out of nature, your forgiving Spirit, we ask for that Spirit right now, that what comes out of my mouth be in harmony with your Spirit, Lord. I'm asking you to strengthen my voice, and I thank you, Lord, in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, part 2, acclimating to outdoor healing. During the pandemic, we all learned what the merchants of pharmacare were willing to do to us without our permission or even our consent, or knowledge, that is. We were awakened as from a dream into a nightmare, which we now know pharmakeia to be. Those that are awake and paying attention in the world are now actively seeking alternatives to Babylon's medical madness. You know what that means? It means that health reform is now present truth for such a time as this. And God has revealed that his provisions for the terrible emergencies of disease are located outside, in nature. All we have to do is show up. The healing stories in this presentation are taken from the pages of history. They tell what different people did to acclimate themselves to the healing agencies of nature. Prophecy and the signs of the times are telling us that soon we may not even have a choice in the matter. If we expect to survive what's already coming for us, then we will need God's magnificent outdoor automatic healthcare system. We start with this category, making our homes compliant with Eden principles. Yes, our homes must comply with Eden's outdoor healing principles as well, else we'll still be sick. All right, we start with this one. The Swiss Alps. Living in the shadows brings disease. Here's the article. In the deep valleys among the Alps, the sun shines only a few hours each day. In consequence, the inhabitants suffer terribly from scrofula and other diseases. Many of the women suffer from goiters, and many of the males are idiots. This is a quote from a long time ago. But strange as it may seem, higher up on the mountain's sunny slopes, the inhabitants are remarkably hardy. By the way, scrofula is tuberculosis of the neck, and goiter is inflammation of the thyroid gland in the neck. Let me back up here a bit. But strange as it may seem, higher up on the mountain's sunny slopes, the inhabitants are remarkably hardy and are well developed both physically and mentally. The only difference in their modes of life is the greater amount of sunshine at the higher altitudes, when the sick, unfortunate ones who live in the deep valleys are brought up the mountainside with longer daily exposure to the healing rays of the sun. They rapidly improve. This one's from Ireland. Bad housing accommodation in Ireland accounted for a good deal. And unfortunately, in some cases, the replacing of hovels with modern cottages made things, TB, worse instead of better, because the occupants knew nothing about ventilation. And the plastered houses were airproof as well as weatherproof, whereas the old loosely built houses let in fresh air on all sides, while the expired air escaped through a hole which let out the smoke. All right, third story. The following story is excerpted from an article entitled Housebound by Mrs. E.E. Kellogg. This was 1905. She wrote, In the effort made some years ago to civilize the American Indians, a certain government agent in the Northwest built some comfortable, up-to-date dwellings upon the farms in his jurisdiction, which he succeeded in persuading the Indians to occupy. Not long thereafter, circumstances necessitated his leaving his station for a time, but he left, congratulating himself upon the progress his wards had made toward civilization. Imagine his surprise upon returning to his charge 2 years later to find the Indians reinstated in their wigwams, while the houses he had taken so much pains to provide for them were devoted to the storage of their farming implements. Upon inquiry as to the occasion for such change, he was informed that all who slept in the houses became sick, and some spit blood. When they returned to their well-aerated wigwams, they regained their health, and naturally they preferred health to houses. Too much house was the Indian chief's naive diagnosis of the difficulty. Too much house may be rightfully credited as the cause of a large share of ills in these days of modern architectural achievements. It is pretty well understood that the air and sunshine are among the most efficacious remedial agents in cases of illness. That which is of so much utility in the restoration of health is of no less value for its preservation. The life-giving, life-sustaining properties of sunlight and fresh air evince the Creator's purposeful provision for the health of his creatures. Getting any ideas here? Yeah. I don't think any of us are going to move into teepees anytime soon, but maybe here in the near future. Without these, no living thing can thrive and maintain resistance to disease. So why then spurn these munificent gifts of heaven to immure oneself behind airtight walls of brick and wood and stone with closed doors and shaded windows, keeping out as much as possible of the vivifying elements? Interesting way to put that. Okay, moving on. We are told a place should be provided, enclosed either with canvas or with glass, where in cooler weather, the patients can sit in the sun without feeling the wind. This is an important principle here. By the way, this garage you see here is located near our church here in Nebraska. I mean, what an excellent idea. Turning the top floor of a building into a solarium. The sunbathers can't be seen from the ground either. Now, so think sunbathing options for your patients there if you're a medical missionary. Think an open-air gymnasium, canvas privacy booths, a UV transmitting plastic attic roof like you see here. One of the most beautiful adornments our homes can have is the cheering sunlight, gilding and glorifying everything it rests upon. Our children can but have discontented, unhappy, and homesick feelings shut in by walls with windows darkened, excluding the glad sunshine. Some mothers are so anxious to exclude the sun and air from their rooms that they will not allow more than half a window exposed, free from shades, to let in the light and sun. They shut out these blessings as though they were enemies to life and health. Their rooms have a dismal, lonesome appearance that children feel, though they cannot explain why they feel discontented, languid, and irritable. If the windows should be freed from blinds and curtains, and the air and sun be permitted to freely enter their darkened rooms, there would be seen a change for the better in the mental and physical health of their children. The pure air would have an invigorating influence upon them, and the sun that carries healing in its beams would soothe and cheer and make them happy, joyous, and healthful. We inquire, what is the use of building houses with windows in them when these windows are not used but kept closed and draped to exclude the light and air? Sunlight through ordinary window glass retains some healing qualities, but loses others. Unless the windows are quartz or UV transmitting plastic, that is. For instance, chick A was raised under glass. Chick B was raised in direct sunlight. Chickens born of the same brood may be separated into two equal groups at hatching. Half are placed in the glass cage and half are outside. Everything else, food, water, and sunshine, may be the same, but the chicks behind the glass will not thrive. They will be stunted. They will have weak legs. They will act for all the world like rickety children. The only difference was that the strong, healthy chickens have had unfiltered sunlight. Here's why this happens. Light filtered through ordinary window glass filters out about 86% of the UV. Most UVA passes through, but nearly all UVB and UVC are blocked. And that's just one pane untinted window glass. Nowadays, everything's two panes. UV is the most biologically active component of sunlight. A regular diet of filtered sunlight is akin to a regular diet of processed junk food. Both may keep us alive for a while, but not in peak health. All right, two things may be done about this. The more windows that can be opened to sunlight and fresh air, the better. Look into installing UV transmitting plastic panes. And here's a resource for that. This supplier has branches in multiple states in the US and in other countries. The link to this webpage is now on my website, thesuncure.com, so you can easily find it. It's the last navigation button. All right. What about health in the wintertime? How do you regain your health without sunlight? All right. Well, there's some stories that might give us some ideas on that. Like I say, different people did it differently. Not everyone can do the same thing for all sorts of different reasons. All right, first one. Exercise in the open air. This is counsel we've been given. Exercise in the open air, even in winter, is necessary for the healthful circulation of the blood. The pure, invigorating air of heaven is God's free gift to men and women, and it is impossible for them to be cheerful, healthful, and happy unless they appreciate these rich bounties and allow them to answer the purpose for which they were designed. This is from Dr. Kellogg, 1928. Cold air is a friend, not an enemy, a powerful healing agent, not a cause for disease. It is the avoidance of cold air that causes disease, not its presence. Not its presence. Let's go to an example from the first open-air school in Battle Creek during the War on TB. This is the Kimball House, first open-air school in Battle Creek. This is Eleanor and Virginia Kimball. These two sisters were the first two students in the first open-air school in Battle Creek, Michigan. Their father started it in 1914 with Dr. Kellogg and another doctor. The doctors at Battle Creek wanted to, quote, make sick children well and well children stronger to prevent TB and other infectious diseases. And these were popular all over the world, by the way. Originally, 125 children from around the city were identified as potentially benefiting from the open-air school. Many children recuperating from illnesses or those from poor families. These were invited. But on the first day of school, not one child showed up. Now that's got to be discouraging. Well, they were not daunted. So the children of the doctors were drafted to attend the school, including these two girls. Eventually, all 5 Kimball children attended an open-air school. The daily routine of a hot, healthy lunch, rest periods, fresh, invigorating air, and lots of individual attention was proved very beneficial, and the town took notice. Soon, other students joined them. According to the Battle Creek Inquirer, February 20, 1916, the tide of sentiment turned so suddenly and completely in its favor that those at the head of the schoolwork are overwhelmed with demands and entreaties of parents who wanted their children given such health-giving opportunities. The title of that article was "Open Air School Becomes Very Popular. Here, and provision must be made to extend the system." The windows were kept open, excuse me, even in the coldest weather, but you notice they weren't wide open. A stove near the teacher's platform and radiators around the room kept the room temperature near 60 degrees. We'll probably need to know that in the future. The ideal is cold air for the lungs, warmth for the rest of the body. Students dressed in special hooded uniforms made from Hudson Bay wool blankets. They wore gloves and felt boots, which reach up to their knees. Their bulky uniform was worn over their regular school clothes. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg donated the milk from the sanitarium farms and a sun lamp for the students, who took light treatments for 20 minutes each day. The school nurse made regular visits, and when the children were sufficiently improved, they returned to regular classrooms. This is Dr. Kellogg talking. "Cold, fresh air has special value," says Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, "in good health, because it stimulates the organs and all the functions of the body." I didn't know that. "It quickens the heart to the greatest activity and increases the number of red corpuscles in the blood. Cold air also contains more oxygen to the cubic inch than does warm air." And he explains, "In 6 breaths of cold air, one gets as much oxygen as he would in 7 breaths of warm air." Now, this would explain why it's so much harder to breathe in saunas that rely on a closed cabinet and heated air, 130 to 140 degrees. That closed cabinet of necessity means rebreathing one's own impure exhaled air, plus the toxic vapors from your perspiring body. Hence, the body takes in 1/7 more oxygen in cold weather than in warm weather. This increased amount of oxygen is a matter of great consequence, says Kellogg. This is why one feels better in cold than in warm air. A brisk walk on a cold, crisp winter morning creates a splendid appetite for breakfast, increased metabolism. For the same reason that the fire burns brighter on a cold winter night. When the fire burns with a particularly bright glow, people are wont to say, "Winter is coming. See how bright the fire burns?" The fire burns brighter and faster because it has 1/7 more oxygen. That was from the Journal of the Outdoor Life, 1905. Cold open-air workers free from colds. Men largely living open-air lives are free from colds. Really? Whatever exposure to extremes of weather they undergo, for example, agricultural laborers, fishermen, Arctic travelers. Shackleton, in his Antarctic expedition, recorded a single outbreak of cold after the opening of a bale of clothes packed in London. Men taken from shop or office, turned into soldiers and put under canvas, escape the catarrhal diseases from which they suffered in civil life. Crowded together in sheds, they suffered from these far more. Another example here. This one's kind of interesting. Nurses get more colds than their open-air patients. Nurses who shut themselves up for the evening are more affected by colds than their patients who live in open-air shelters in sanatoria. When children after the holidays return to school, epidemics of cold usually begin to run through the community. In the holidays, they may be paddle all day in the sea, bare-legged, exposed to far greater cooling than at school. They may shiver and be blue with cold after bathing, but they do not suffer from colds. The colds begin when the weather confines them in shut-up and artificially warmed schoolrooms and places of assembly. All right, in 1914 and 1950, Canadian troops were camped in tents on Salisbury Plain under extreme conditions of wet and discomfort. Extreme conditions of wet and comfort, but with excellent health. As soon as they were moved into the huts, catarrhs and sore throats spread rapidly, and several cases of cerebrospinal fever occurred. Trench warfare soldiers free from sickness even when chilled. Oh, this is interesting. When I was in Paris before the war, wrote a French soldier, I never passed a winter without coughs and colds and rheumatics. Here in the trenches, I never have a thing the matter with me, and we are all like that. At the medical inspection the other day, out of 400 men, there was only one man who had anything the matter with him, and he just had a cut finger. We were on an exposed slope, bare and cheerless, with mud in generous quantities and a chill, penetrating wind accentuating the discomfort. But no one except myself seemed to mind it. Both the susceptibility to these diseases and deaths from these diseases peak in the cold months. Yet, according to the experiences outlined by Professor Leonard Hill in his book Sunshine and Open Air, 1927, page 30, this phenomena is not a direct result of cold on the body, but rather that the rise of these diseases in winter is chiefly caused by cold weather impelling people indoors into stuffy, poorly ventilated, overheated rooms where infection is intensified and health weakened by heat stagnation, a lowered metabolism, and a want of sunlight. That was his take. Now, this is what Dr. Kellogg had to say about that. Dr. Kellogg proved that even a want of sunlight in the winter is not necessarily a direct cause of winter diseases. For example, infectious patients at the Battle Creek Sanitarium were assigned to live in open-air tent colonies outside, even in the winter. They were not allowed to stay inside the sanitarium building. Now, here's what Dr. Kellogg said about those patients in open-air tents in the wintertime. Sanitarium patients, although struggling with such formidable maladies as lung and bone tuberculosis, thrive best, make the surest and most rapid progress towards recovery in the winter months. Now, that was not expected. How is that kind of rapid healing possible without sunlight? Cold air, in this case, was even more effective than sunlight. How come we didn't know this? All my life, I have been perplexed as to why God shuts off nature's healing agencies in the wintertime. Why would he do that? Well, now, finally, there's an answer. God did not shut off his healing agencies in wintertime. He just activates different healing agencies in the wintertime. Cold, fresh air is a major healing modality. It's not actually a lack of sunlight that's making, it's not actually a lack of sunlight that's making people sick in the wintertime. It's the lack of fresh air, especially cold air. And that means that there is no such thing as cold and flu season. It's not a season for that. It's the seal ourselves up indoors season. Now wait, we know that both light and dark cycles are necessary for our health. We have to have them both, alternating. But this observation from Dr. Kellogg seems to be telling us that hot and cold cycles may also be necessary for our health, not just seasonally, but day in the warmth and night in the cold. We're supposed to experience that both daily. Instead, we shut ourselves up. We keep the temperature the same as it was during the day. I don't believe we were intended to have that happen. I think we messed with nature's natural order of things. This means that for optimal health, we can at least sleep with the windows open in our homes. The healing effects of cold winter air was also seen in the TB patients in the Swiss Alps. Now, these patients at Leysen also continued to improve in the outdoors even in wintertime. Notice they're ice skating, snow all around them. Even though vitamin D production was allegedly absent, was this because they stored vitamin D up during the warmer seasons or something else, or both? Was there still healing energy in the winter's sunlight, infrared? Was it the cold itself that increased metabolism, which sped up healing? Was it the tonic effect of cold? Was it the higher concentration of oxygen in the cold air which causes the fires of life to burn brighter? What else don't we know here? We mortal men know nothing. Can we, by searching, find out God? We have been told all of our lives that cold air is to be avoided, that sunlight is to be feared, for it causes disease and death, that we must have drugs to manage our ever-increasing chronic ills, that there is no better way, and that there never was a better way. Who are we going to listen to? It's time to stop listening to even the philosophies of pharmakeia, and to start implementing God's magnificent outdoor healing agencies. What a treasure trove of healing power we have at our fingertips. Just walk outside. So, how is this possible in the wintertime and the freezing winds? How are these kids not chilled and getting sick? All right, here is why what you're looking at worked at Leysen. There is a secret to this. Leysen was known to be a place that was almost devoid of wind or even breezes. They were not chilled. In those outfits, they were not chilled because the sun is shining directly on them. These children could not do what they are doing here in the winter had there been a cold winter breeze. Even a breeze, they couldn't do it. The sunlight and lack of wind enabled this type of therapy. Not everyone can do it. Not every place can be done that way. Most places can't be done this way. And these kids acclimated themselves over time before they can get out there. And they became hardened to changes in temperature and diseases. And later on, we're going to have some stories about that. And Kellogg proved that tanning also hardens the person to changes in temperature and normalizes circulation so they could handle this. This is from Leonard Hill again. Regarding the newcomers at an English alpine sanatorium, it is noticeable how quickly they respond to the climatic conditions. And in 2 or 3 weeks, look and feel in better health. The writer, discussing the climate with 4 men, all cases of arrested TB, able to engage in vigorous outdoor sports and looking strong and healthy, found that they agreed on this, that They had never known what it was to be really well and feel the full joy of living till they were impelled by tuberculosis to practice the outdoor life. Now that is vindication of God's outdoor automatic healthcare system. God told us right after Adam and Eve fell that he would curse the earth for man's sake. The curses that God placed upon the earth caused the freezing winters. But the very cold itself was for our sake, for our healing. Now, acclimating to outdoor living. Some of us might be thinking, well, what do I need to do that for? I'm never going to move outside. It may not be our choice. And it may not be our patient's choice. We're going to be thrust out of our homes at some point. We see the writing on the wall. So I suggest you pay attention to this because it may very well apply to you. If not you, someone you know. We start with this counsel from the pen of inspiration. Sister, this is talking to one family, in particularly the mother. Sister C has a diseased imagination. She has secluded herself from the air until she cannot endure it without inconvenience. The heat of her room is very injurious to health. Her circulation is depressed. She has lived in the hot air so much that she cannot endure the exposure of a ride out of doors without realizing a change. That's a negative change. Her poor health is owing somewhat to the exclusion of air. And she has become so tender that she cannot have air without making her sick. Yeah, that's possible. If she continues to indulge this diseased imagination, she will be able to bear scarcely a breath of air. She ought to have the windows lowered in her room all through the day, that there may be a circulation of air. God is not pleased with her for thus murdering herself. It is unnecessary. She has become thus sensitive through indulging a diseased mind. Air she needs, air she must have. She is destroying not only her own vitality, but that of her husband and daughter, and of all who visit her. Wow, that's an ouch moment. The air in her room is decidedly impure and dead. None can have health who accustom themselves to such an atmosphere. She has petted herself in this matter until she cannot visit the houses of her brethren without taking cold. For her own sake and for the sake of those around her, she must change this. She should accustom herself to the air, increasing it a little every day until she can breathe the pure, vitalizing air without injury. Notice it wasn't the air that was doing it to her, it was her mind. The surface of the skin is nearly dead because it has no air to breathe. Its million little mouths are closed because they are clogged by the impurities of the system and for want of air. It would be presumption to let in a free draft of air at once from out of doors all through the day. Let it be by degrees. Change gradually. In a week, she can have the windows down 2 or 3 inches day and night. Lungs and liver are diseased because she deprives herself of vital air. Air is the free blessing of heaven, calculated to electrify the whole system. Without it, the system will be filled with disease and become dormant, languid, feeble. Yet you have all been for years living with a very limited amount of air. In thus doing, your wife drags others into the same poisonous atmosphere with herself. None of you can possess clear, unclouded brains while breathing a poisonous atmosphere. Sister C dreads to stir out to go anywhere because she must feel the change in the temperature and take cold. She can yet be brought into a much better condition of health if she rightly treats herself. Twice a week, she should take a general bath as cool as will be agreeable. A little cooler every time until the skin is toned up. All right, this is a different type of acclimation that we're going to talk about here. This is a story. Some of you may have heard it in Deceived by Pharmakeia series. This is about Dr. Osig. You might remember this from the Detroit Free Press, Sunday, July 22, 1906. Remarkable case of cure of consumption by outdoor life. Consumption was TB. This was when they were still thinking that there was no cure for TB. Finally, they discovered it was sunlight and fresh air that cured it. All right, here we go. Battle Creek doctor, given up as beyond saving 5 years ago, is now strong as an ox. Never feels effects of heat or cold. That man has acclimated. Here's the story. One of the most marvelous cases on record of complete cure of pulmonary consumption simply by outdoor life and fresh air is that of Dr. Herbert Osig of this city. 5 years ago, it was announced to him that he had tuberculosis and was beyond recovery, said his doctor. He decided, however, that he would not die. Since that time, he has lived in a tent, this tent, summer and winter, and is now cured by the strenuous treatment which he has subjected himself to. Before I continue there, see that tree house up there with a ramp to it? That is where Dr. Kellogg slept at night for his fresh air. His children slept in tents. Don't know what the wife did. All right, continuing this paragraph. He has a tent 12 by 14 feet, this is Dr. Osig, in the grove, at the home, on the property of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. That was Dr. Kellogg's mansion there. Dr. Kellogg owned the entire block. I've been there. It's a really big block. It is a framework of wood covered with wire netting, with a screen door for an entrance. There is a canvas top and a fly. There are canvas sides and ends to the tent which roll up but are never lowered except during a rain or snowstorm, and then only upon the side which the storm is approaching. There's a wooden floor. In this tent, the doctor sleeps all winter with the sides open and with no stove or fire. That was his choice. Other tents do have them. Often in the morning, his bed is covered with the snow sifted through the screening. This is him 3.5 years after doing a graduated exercise. He is in the Battle Creek Sanitarium open air gymnasium. Continuing the story here. In the summertime, when he comes to his tent in the evening, he puts on a light, open-breasted shirt and a thin pair of white trousers. He goes bareheaded and barefooted constantly, well, except when in the city on business. He never wears underclothing. I don't understand what that means. July 1905, Good Health magazine. The outdoor gymnasium at the Battle Creek Sanitarium is where patients went to get as much sun exposure as possible. Sunlight was considered to be the most effective of all their treatment modalities, and they had a lot of treatment modalities. At night, Dr. Osig goes to bed stark naked. About 10 o'clock, he pulls a blanket over him, and sometimes about 1 o'clock, he covers himself with a second blanket. He never feels in the least the effects of heat or cold. Wouldn't that be wonderful? In the morning, he takes a 10-mile run and then a bath. Twice a day, he again takes runs of 2 miles each. Frequently, he walks to Kalamazoo and back, a distance of 50 miles. They didn't say he did that all in one day. Didn't say he didn't either. His health is now perfect. his muscles like iron, and he is an athlete. He is visited by hundreds of patients from the sanitarium. The professors at Yale College have extended to him an invitation to visit that institution in September, and he has accepted. Whoa! What if hundreds of people visited us for curing all manner of disease, even cancer, by a simple outdoor lifestyle? An outdoor lifestyle that we model for them. If we want to be noticed, we must do something notable. If we want to vindicate God's healing agencies, let's vindicate them big. If nature does the healing, God gets the credit, which is a very, very good thing. Dr. Osig never uses meat or vegetables, salt, pepper, or other condiments, but lives entirely upon fruit and nuts. Oh, we could have a conversation on that. There are several other persons living in tents near the doctor, among them being George H. Allen, the champion pedestrian of Great Britain, who recently arrived in this country. Champion pedestrian means a speed walker. Allen is shown with Osig in the picture herewith. Osig is holding a fawn, there being 19 deer and fawns in the park in which the doctor is tenting, and that was Kellogg's property. Did you notice that the outdoor cure didn't just cure him of TB? It made him a robust, powerful athlete, acclimated to all weather conditions, resistant to disease and cold within a year or two. He was far healthier after the outdoor cure than before he ever got sick. Remember, those doctors pronounced him as beyond saving. And you will note that the world was clamoring for his story. It's what happens when we live those advanced principles of health reform. Now, to present to you something less extreme. This picture here, I just saw it on eBay, bought it, it hasn't arrived yet, so this is their low-res image here, but this is of Layson. Here, this is a less extreme option. For some, this was the most reasonable thing that could be done in wintertime, to open-air porches right out of their balconies from their rooms. This was in the snow. In the wintertime, you see all the snow around there. This next one is also from Layson in the town. For others like these, this sort of thing was the only available option above a store in town with prying eyes on porches. All right, let's zoom in on this. See all those women there? Now, mostly, if they were men, they would be, shirts off and shorts. But these are women. So to adapt to this sort of public setting, the women did not strip down, but rather wore thin, white, UV permeable, natural fiber clothing. That was a mouthful, yes. And you will notice that there are privacy panels at the ends of the porches, about 5 of them. Dr. Kellogg strongly recommended that especially children and invalids should be dressed in thin white clothing as weather permits. Now, the next story is being told by Professor Leonard Hill again, who ran an open-air sun cure clinic in the Alps. It's the most dramatic acclamation story I have. It's also the most extreme, but the results were amazing. This is something you would have to do, of course, in private. In private. Here we go. This is Dr. Leonard Hill's introduction here. It says, the tubercular patient in the Alps has the best opportunities of exposing his skin to sun and air baths, and he or she must learn to do this and give up over-clothing and overheating in the sun boxes and stuffy, warm rooms indoors at night, which are permitted at many foreign sanitaria. He didn't like that, in other words. He can gain a lesson from the following letter sent to me from Australia A lesson taught, by the way, by the success of the exposure treatment applied to children in Laysan. All right, here's the letter that this guy is representing the guy in the story, all right, the banana farmer there. He said, I had read your article on Dr. Rollier's sun cure and had experienced the delight of surf bathing, ocean. The pleasure of which I have observed lies quite as much in the exposure of the skin to the sun and wind as to the water. He'll explain that. All right, about 2 months and a half ago, it occurred to me that I was in a capital position to get all the pleasure and benefit that might be obtained by sunbathing. I work by myself on a banana plantation on the side of a mountain. So I started first working naked to the waist. Then, I told you this was extreme. Then, about a week later, I discarded pants and boots and worked absolutely naked for about a week. Then, being afraid that someone might come on me unawares, and also there being times when I might possibly be seen from an adjacent house, I took an old pair of trousers, cut the legs off at the fork, and have worked in them ever since. I find it very pleasant and enjoyable, and am sorry to have to put clothes on when I leave my work. The most enjoyable part of it to me is not the sun, but the feeling of the air in motion on my skin. Pause here for a moment. After I read that, I tried that while mowing my lawn in the morning. He was absolutely right. We were supposed to have, remember Adam and Eve? They were naked. Constant exposure to sunlight and that moving breeze. We were supposed to feel good with a moving breeze on our skin. That's why it felt good, because it's supposed to be that way. All right. Though exceptionally strong and healthy, I have all my life been an exceedingly chilly mortal that dreaded the cold. Yeah. It was indeed mainly owing to the fact that I left England in search of a warmer climate, Australia, and for the last few years, this inability to stand the cold has been increasing. Now, it is 9 p.m. and a fortnight from midwinter day. I am sitting here perfectly naked, writing this in a cold, drafty house on a bare wooden chair, and the very same spot where this time last year I could not sit without a cushion on the chair, an extra thick pair of woolen trousers, a thick flannel shirt, a woolen sweater, and a heavy overcoat, and then I'd have to go to bed for warmth. A great deal earlier than this. I have often had to put on my overcoat in the house at night in the middle of summer. But now I go driving with thin trousers and a thin cotton singlet, unbuttoned, my chest all bare, and nothing else. I work naked some days, in a bitter cold wind driving light showers onto me. At times, I take off my abbreviated pants and sit or lie down on the cold, wet ground and enjoy the nice, cool feel of it on my bare skin. Now, that was a complete 180-degree turnaround. We don't have to be the way we are. Just take some effort. He says, winter has no more terrors for me. I expect in another year to qualify for a trip to the South Pole. And all this is the result of 2.5 months nakedness. All right, the final story up next. By the way, this is a fascinating story, and it'll help a lot of us. Not everyone, because there's lots of different options. Anyway, the final story is up next, is the most practical and relevant to Adventists, as the pestilences of these end times ratchet up. Actually, it's relevant to anyone who is awake and paying attention to what's happening in the world, not just Adventists. What's coming for us may very well require what I'm about to show you. It's detailed, 6 paragraphs. The 2 historical photographs are what's being talked about. This is the last story here. Since 1905, that was 5 years, consumptive insane patients have been separated and treated to their own great advantage, and incidentally to that of their non-TB fellow inmates, in canvas tents throughout the 4 seasons of the year at the Manhattan State Hospital, East New York City. That's the camp you're looking at. An experimental camp was established consisting of 2 large dormitory tents, 20 feet by 40 feet, each containing 20 beds, with smaller tents, the ones on the right, with smaller tents of different shapes for the accommodation of the nurses, the care of hospital stores, pantries, and a dining tent for such patients as were able to leave their beds and tents for their meals. It was originally intended to continue the camp only through the summer. But when in the autumn it was found that the favorable experience continued, it was decided to carry the experiment on a modified scale into the approaching winter. The camp at first had been placed upon an elevated knoll, properly exposed to the full force of the summer breezes. Properly exposed. For the winter, its site was removed to the center of the island where hills and buildings acted as a windbreak. The number of patients was reduced to 20, those most ill being retained and the others being returned, much against their will, to the buildings. That seems to be a theme. In the accessory tents above mentioned, large stoves, the accessory tents, that's those little ones, large stoves were built with wire screens surrounding them to protect the patients, and with asbestos and other fireproof material for the prevention of fire. Slatted wooden movable pathways were prepared, which might furnish means of passage between tents when the storms should come. It was found that despite high wind and bad weather, a more even temperature had been maintained and less discomfort had been experienced in the tents than in the hospital wards most exposed to the force of the gale. This tent camp, in which all physical patients with TB symptoms, with active manifestations are isolated, has remained in continual use through the succeeding winters and intervening seasons. Among the results obtained are the reduction to a minimum of the danger of infection to other patients and to employees. The patients themselves have suffered no injury or hardship, but have, on the contrary, been unmistakably benefited. There has been a decrease in the death rate, both absolute and relative, a marked general increase in bodily weight, amounting in the case of one patient to an actual doubling of weight from 83 to 160 pounds, and mental, let's back that up without that, let's see. There's been a decrease in the death rate, both absolute and relative, and a marked general increase in bodily weight, and mental has, as a general rule, been the naturally accompanying or associated of physical improvement among the patients in this camp. Common colds were here unknown during the winter time. Dr. McDonald makes the observation that where physicists and insanity coexist, they are apt to alternate as to the prominence of several manifestations, the mental symptoms being more pronounced, while the physical are in abeyance and vice versa. Abeyance means temporary disuse. In other words, their mental condition improved when the physical improved, and vice versa. Under the tent treatment, he has found a general disposition toward accord in the manifest improvement in both respects, proceeding concurrently. And some of the discharges from the hospital, which gave most satisfaction at the time and most assurance for the patient's future, were of inmates of the tuberculosis camp. Now, these are just a few of the many healing stories of God's magnificent outdoor automatic healthcare system. And even in just this presentation, I had to take out numerous counsels and wonderful stories to keep it under an hour. By the way, before we close here. See that round tent that you're looking at? That was so designed that a patient can sit in there in that lounge chair and sunbathe, and the tent can rotate. See the wooden platform? It rotates to follow the sun. You have to do it manually, but yeah, it'll rotate. Now, part 3 will be treating the sick Eden's way. That one's going to be my favorite of all these 3. Look forward to seeing you on that. Why don't we end with prayer? Father God, we've seen your magnificent ways. I believe you're trying to send us back to this, to Eden's healthcare system. And we have a work to do, and we ask that you guide us through this, open opportunities, inspire us, help us to be acclimated for what's coming, sir. We thank you for your mercies always, sir. Thank you. Amen.